In our headlines on this Thursday afternoon, February 8th, here on the Korean Peninsula. President Yoon Seollal believes an inter-Korean summit is possible if the prospects of substantial summit results are in place, which he added requires a bottom-up strategy centered on active, bilateral, working-level negotiations. Meanwhile, North Korea, for its part, declares void a number of cross-border exchange and economic accords, including the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Act, as well as the Mount Kumgangsan International Tourism Special Zone Act. Over in the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejects proposals made by Hamas to a peace framework that is still in the works, denouncing them as, quote, delusional, but negotiators remain optimistic as peace efforts continue. We begin with details of a pre-recorded interview in the format of a documentary aired by a local broadcaster Wednesday night that shares President Yoon Seollal's thoughts on a host of diplomatic and domestic concerns. That being said, our foreign affairs correspondent Choi Min-jung starts us off with his remarks on inter-Korean matters and related security efforts.
South Korean President Yoon Seollal hinted that an inter-Korean summit could be possible only if it guaranteed results. Speaking in an interview on KBS TV on Wednesday, Yoon said this would only happen using a bottom-up approach.
북이 핵을 포기하든 안 하든 남북 정상회담 할 수 있습니다. 또 이것이 탑다운 방식으로 해서는 곤란하고요. 버텀업 방식으로 양국의 실무자들 간의 어떤 교류와 이런 논의가 진행을 되면서 의제도 만들어 놓고 또 거기에 대해서 결과를 조금 준비를 해놓고 정상회담을 해야 되는 것이지.
Yoon also said South Korea is capable of developing its own nuclear weapons in a short period of time, but stressed that doing so would be, quote, unrealistic, as it would entail serious economic sanctions. He underlined that compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is more in line with South Korea's national interests. Describing the regime as, quote, an irrational force, the president added that the South must prepare to counter not only actions based on rational judgments, but also actions based on irrational conclusions. At the same time, Yoon said he would like to provide humanitarian aid to North Korea to help improve the lives of people there. The president also touched upon relations with South Korea's allies, the U.S. and Japan. Yoon showed confidence that the Seoul-Washington alliance will not be affected by the upcoming U.S. presidential election.
작년에 왔던 그 미 상원의원단이 어떤 의미 있는 얘기를 하시더군요. President changes, but Congress stands still이라는 얘기를 하더라고요. 저희는 뭐 한미 간의 관계는 동맹을 더 강화하고 동맹을 더 업그레이드 하느냐 아니냐의 문제이지 저는 뭐 큰 적이 없을 거라고 보고 있습니다.
And regardless of South Korea's recent rulings on forced labor compensation, Yoon stressed that Seoul-Tokyo relations have been restored. He explained that the ties were normalized last year as security cooperation between the two sides, as well as with the U.S., has become crucial against North Korea's nuclear threats. Regarding relations with China, Yoon said he doesn't think the basic principles of national policy and diplomacy are different between Seoul and Beijing, adding there is no need to be overly concerned. On Ukraine, the president said the supply chain issues emerging from the war can only be solved through international cooperation, and noted that South Korea is making various efforts to prevent any risks. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Now, with regard to domestic issues, President Yoon Seollal addressed his approval ratings for the first time, as well as the scandal over a bag and the First Lady. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
On the domestic side of the 90-minute interview with KBS, President Yoon Seollal had the chance to dive deep into his policy vision for 2024.
제가 취임하고 2022년, 2023년 한 하반기까지는 저희 국정 기조를 제대로 정착시키는 것을 우선으로 했고 작년 하반기부터는 현장을 저희가 중시하고 또 부처 간의 그 벽 허물기를 이제 시행을 하면서 금년에는 더욱더 하여튼 국민들께서 손에 잡히는 체감하는 어떤 그 정책 성과를 이룰 수 있도록 노력할 생각입니다.
While he also reiterated some specific policy plans that he's already announced during the livelihood policy discussions, such as those related to inflation, the stock market, medical reform, and childcare support, in the pre-recorded program, he took a deep dive into topics that he's never shared with the public, like his approval ratings.
좀 국민들이 야속하세요? 열심히 노력하는 걸 못
그렇지
알아주시는 것
않습니다.
같아서.
저는 이런 지지율의 추이를 보면은 만족하는 건 아니지만 국제 이런 금리가 높고 이렇게 하다 보니까 외국도 다 지금 경기가 많이 위축돼 있습니다.
네.
그럼에도 불구하고 국민들께서 이 정도 제게 실망을 좀 덜 해주시는 것만으로도
네.
저는 뭐 감사하게 생각하고.
He also spoke about the opposition Democratic Party of Korea's holding of a supermajority in the National Assembly. Some policies needing the parliament's backing are stymied for Yoon, while the opposition can pass legislation without the ruling People Power Party's votes. So far, President Yoon has vetoed 9 bills sent from the National Assembly.
국회에서 이제 의결된 법이 행정부로 넘어오는 과정에서도 여야의 좀 충분한 이런 수기가 제대로 이루어지지 않았다는 점들이 많이 아쉽습니다.
He also touched on a bill that was recently passed with bipartisan support, the ban on dog meat, which gained global attention. While it was passed with overwhelming support by the public, some were opposed to the idea, such as the dog meat traders.
개식용에 대한 금지 법률은 이제 이 정도 국민들이 이런 문화나 이런 것이 바뀌었다고 한다면은 이제는 추진할 수 있는 거 아니냐. 첨단 과학 기술이 이렇게 발전한 나라인데 해외에서 또 우리 한국에 대해서 실망할 수도 있고.
One of the most anticipated moments, however, was the first time President Yoon gave his view on the recent, quote, Dior bag scandal. A Korean-American pastor who knows First Lady Kim Gun-hee's father recorded himself with a hidden camera handing her a $2,200 Dior bag in 2022. Yoon, during their interview, called it a political maneuver as it was released just before the upcoming general election. However, he did emphasize that it was something that should not be repeated.
자꾸 오겠다고 하고 해서 제가 보기에는 좀 그거를 매정하게 좀 끊지 못한 것이 좀 어떤 문제라는 문제고 좀 아쉽지 않았나 생각이 되는데.
In addition, the program included the first tour of his office at the Yongsan presidential office following a move from the presidential Blue House, which included presents given to Yoon by other leaders from around the world. 김도현, Arirang News.
And staying on the peninsula, North Korea has unilaterally abolished a number of cross-border exchange and economic accords. The regime state media on Thursday announced that a plenary session of the Supreme People's Assembly on Wednesday nullified the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Act, the Mount Kumgangsan International Tourism Special Zone Act, and other deals to promote joint economic ventures. The latest development follows a series of rampant cruise missile testings by the regime. And a new U.S. report underscores the risks posed by North Korea's abuse of the digital economy and Russia's role in aggravating matters. Our Moon Hae-ryan has details.
The United States has identified Russia and North Korea as the highest risk threat actors due to their illicit procurement and revenue generation efforts. A review of data on North Korea's cyber activity came in the 2024 National Proliferation Financing Risk Assessment, released on Thursday by the U.S. Treasury Department, along with separate reports on money laundering and terrorist financing. Proliferation financing refers to the act of providing funds supporting activities regarding weapons of mass destruction. And in this latest report, the U.S. claims that North Korea's malicious use of cyber technology and IT workers has funded its WMD capabilities through hacking and ransomware attacks. Washington estimates that roughly $1.7 billion worth of virtual assets was stolen by the regime in 2022. and that Pyongyang will continue to increase its use of cyber theft and illicit trade to raise revenue for its WMD program. The report cited the numerous intercontinental ballistic missile tests conducted throughout 2022 and 2023, as well as the employment of ICBM technology to launch a military satellite as proof that the regime is bolstering its military capabilities. It also discussed North Korea's relationship with Russia as another concern, stating that with the regime's assistance in providing military equipment and munitions to Russia for the war in Ukraine, Moscow could in turn reciprocate by providing military assistance to Pyongyang. In a podcast conducted by The Washington Post on Wednesday, the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Tech, Ann Neuberger, also spoke out on North Korea's use of tech to fund their WMD program. She claimed that the North's creative and innovative methods to glean billions of dollars meant that the U.S. needed to re-evaluate standards of red teaming and data training. Red teaming is a structured testing effort that simulates a real cyber attack to identify vulnerabilities in cybersecurity. Over the coming weeks, the U.S. Treasury Department plans to combine the data from the risk assessments to release the 2024 National Strategy for Combating Terrorist and Other Illicit Finance. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Over in the port city of Pohang, South Korean and American Marine Corps are engaged in their first combined exercise for the year. According to authorities here on this Thursday, some 400 soldiers from both countries are taking part in the Korean Marine Exercise Program, which includes armored vehicles, battle tanks, as well as heavy-lift helicopters. The exercise centers on enhancing the combat readiness of the Marines and takes place some 20 times a year. This latest drill runs until February 20th. Korea's politicians took to the streets of the capital city this morning to personally greet people seeking an early start home to celebrate the Lunar New Year holiday that begins tomorrow, Friday. Members of the ruling People Power Party, including its interim leader Han Dong-hoon, were at Seollal station earlier on this Thursday, while their counterparts of the main opposition Democratic Party, led by Lee Jae-myung, were at Yongsan station in the city center. Other big-name politicians, including Lee Jun-seok and Lee Na-kyun, who recently launched their own parties, were also out and about as we count down roughly 2 months to the general election. Now, as I just mentioned, we are poised to kick off a 4-day holiday starting tomorrow, that is Friday, to mark the Lunar New Year. The Lunar New Year, that is. And my colleague Shin Ha-young shares with us the cost of setting a Charye table this year, keeping in mind inflation and the efforts to tame it. To take a listen.
While some consumer groups claim that the cost of preparing a Charye table has increased significantly from the previous year, the South Korean government says it is at a similar level to 2023. The Korean National Council of Consumer Organizations reported that the cost of groceries for a Charye table for a family of 4 jumped 8.6% from the year before. On the other hand, according to the Agriculture Minister on Wednesday, the cost only rose by 0.7% on year to 309,641 Korean won, or around $230.
Despite consumer prices dropping to the 2% range for the first time in 6 months, skyrocketing fruit prices are putting a dent in consumers' wallets.
The soaring prices of fruits, vegetables, and manufactured goods made me hesitant to buy, but I ended up purchasing them to celebrate Seollal with my family.
The prices of fruits and vegetables have gone up a lot. I even hesitated to buy zucchini as the price doubled.
Fruit price in January surged by over 28% from the previous year, 10 times higher than the overall average increase. Apple prices in particular jumped more than 50%. One expert attributes higher fruit prices to abnormal weather conditions.
Apple prices have skyrocketed since last year's Chuseok. Abnormal weather conditions, including cold waves, have resulted in poor apple harvests. Since the country doesn't import apples, prices are rising due to limited supply.
In response, the government aims to lower prices by allocating an all-time high of 84 billion won, which is around $63 million, to provide discount coupons for the purchase of agricultural, livestock, and fisheries products. Tariffs have been slashed on 6 imported fruit types, including pineapples, bananas, and mangoes. However, the issue is that apples and pears, which have seen the highest price increases, aren't included because the country doesn't import these fruits. That means the government plans to address the soaring fruit prices by substituting traditionally used fruit with others, since it cannot dramatically increase domestic production of apples and pears. 신하영, Arirang News.
In other news, Israel has brushed aside proposals made by Hamas to a peace deal being brokered by a number of countries that remain optimistic. As they point out, despite the huddles, peace efforts continue. Our Lee Jae has the latest.
With ongoing talks of a possible ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected the Palestinian militant group's proposed ceasefire terms. The rejection comes as Hamas laid out a series of demands in response to an Israel-backed ceasefire proposal, with the Israeli leader saying that the negotiations with the group were not going anywhere, while describing their terms as bizarre. He added that there's no other solution but a complete and final victory in Gaza, hinting that the goal would be possible within months. Despite the clear rejection from Netanyahu, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's currently in the Middle East, was still hopeful that a deal can be reached.
What I can tell you about these discussions is that while there are some clear non-starters in Hamas's response, we do think it creates space for agreement to be reached. And we will work at that relentlessly until we get there.
The comments come after Blinken met with the Israeli Prime Minister and discussed Hamas's counter-proposal to a ceasefire proposal drawn up by both the U.S. and Israeli spy chiefs before being sent to the militant group last week by Qatari and Egyptian mediators. The top U.S. diplomat has been traveling throughout the Middle East, conducting shuttle diplomacy on his 5th visit to the region since the Hamas attack on October 7th last year. Meanwhile, amid ongoing conflicts around the world, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned on Wednesday that the world has entered an age of chaos that is causing a multitude of suffering and thwarting progress. The UN chief pointed to conflicts in Gaza, Ukraine, and Sudan, but also the protracted situations in Myanmar, Yemen, Haiti, and across Africa's Sahel region. Guterres also slammed the UN Security Council for contributing to the chaos, adding while it's not the first time that the council has been divided, it is the worst. Lee Jae, Arirang News.
Right, and staying with those concerns, Russia launched rampant airstrikes across 6 regions in Ukraine Wednesday morning, killing and injuring dozens of civilians. Our Yoon reports.
Ukrainian authorities reported that Russia fired cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and Shahed-shaped drones at 6 regions across the country on Wednesday morning, killing at least 5 civilians and wounding almost 50 others. Officials said 4 people were killed in Kyiv when missile or drone wreckage hit an 18-story apartment building, causing a fire that gutted apartments on several floors. Power was knocked out in parts of Kyiv, with high-voltage cables damaged and people trapped under rubble. City authorities reported 40 people were wounded in Kyiv, including a pregnant woman. The regional governor of the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv said the attacks also killed 1 man and wounded 6 people in the city, where about 20 residential buildings and public infrastructure were damaged. The Ukrainian military reported that it intercepted 44 drones and missiles of the 64 that were launched. President Zelensky had said last month that air defense and electronic warfare systems that can stop drones are Kyiv's top priorities. The attacks in Kyiv sent Joseph Borrell, the European Union's foreign policy chief, into an air raid shelter at his hotel. He is in Ukraine's capital to discuss military and financial support as the war nears its 3rd year. The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine said Wednesday that civilian casualties in the war have begun increasing again after falling last year. Last month, it documented 158 civilian deaths and 483 wounded, up 37% from last November. So far, the conflict has killed more than 10,000 civilians and wounded nearly 20,000 others. The United States, Ukraine, and 6 allies have previously accused Russia of using North Korean ballistic missiles and launchers supplied by Pyongyang in aerial attacks against Ukraine in violation of UN sanctions. The Russian Defense Ministry said that it used long-range precision weapons and drones against Ukrainian factories that manufacture sea drones, coastal defense missile systems, rockets, and explosives. The ministry said that all targets were hit. 이은진, 아리랑 뉴스.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. Forest fires in Chile's central Valparaiso region reported an increased death toll of at least 131 and more than 300 still missing as of Tuesday. Chile's legal medical service stated that they have identified 35 of the deceased. The forensic medical service said that many bodies recovered were difficult to identify due to the severity of the burns. During his visit to the region, Chile President Gabriel Boric announced a plan to cover water bill costs and donate furniture used for the 2023 Pan American Games to the forest fire victims. The wildfires, which began last Friday, have burned almost 10,000 hectares in the Valparaiso region, damaging thousands of homes. The fires are thought to be Chile's deadliest disaster since the 2010 earthquake. In Pakistan, on the eve of the country's general election, 2 bomb blasts in the Baluchistan region have killed at least 30 and wounded dozens. Late Wednesday local time, the Islamic State claimed responsibility for the attacks via a statement posted on Telegram Messenger. In response to the blasts, Pakistan has closed its western border crossings with Afghanistan and Iran until Friday to tighten security during the election. Both blasts took place in the troubled southwestern region of Baluchistan. The first attack near the election campaign office of an independent candidate in Pishin killed 18 and wounded at least 30. The second attack, less than an hour later, was at an election office of the ultra-conservative Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam party, which killed at least 12, leaving dozens more injured. The JUI party was the target of 2 suicide attacks by the Islamic State just last year. According to a Kremlin spokesperson, American news host Tucker Carlson interviewed Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Tuesday. The former Fox News host becomes the first Western journalist to conduct a one-on-one interview since Russia's full-scale war began with Ukraine. In a video posted on Carlson's X social media account, he said Americans have a right to know all they can about a war they are implicated in. While the interview itself has not been released yet, Carlson's visit to Moscow has been reported to the detail of his every move in Russian state media. Carlson also said he paid for the trip himself and that his purpose was to create a balance with the Ukraine-dominated coverage by Western media. Belgium has banned the import of animal hunting trophies from rare or endangered species. This includes items such as ashtrays made from elephant feet and lion claw bottle openers. The country's environment minister, Zakia Katabi, said on Tuesday that the ban is more symbolic than groundbreaking, as products coming into Belgium could still enter through other EU countries which don't yet have such restrictions. The Belgian parliament voted in late January to ban the imports of products made from endangered animals such as alligators, tigers and rhinos. The Humane Society International said that some 25,000 animal trophies were imported into the European Union from 2014 to 2022. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. It's the eve of the Seollal holiday and the weather looks promising for most parts of the country. But those in the south of Gyeonggi-do and in Chungcheong-do provinces will have high levels of ultrafine dust all day, so have a quality face mask handy. The day of Seollal on Saturday looks to be a wet one with rain and snow in the forecast for some of the western regions. That's including Chungcheong-do and Jeollado provinces, while a mix of rain and snow is in store on Jeju on Sunday. Then the last day of holiday will be a sunny and toasty one nationwide. Now back to today's forecast. It was a colder start to the day than yesterday, but highs should go up 1 to 4 degrees higher than Wednesday with an expected high of 6 degrees in Seoul and over in Chuncheon topping out at 7 degrees, Busan at 11 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Now when we come back from the 4-day holiday weekend, we'll notice much warmer temperatures next week, starting to feel more like spring. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And that ends Thursday's afternoon newscast. We return with our daily panel session in a few minutes, so do stay with us.